The bride was perfect. That was my first thought when Francesca Bellini walked into my office. Perfect in the way marble statues are perfect. Cold. Flawless. Absolutely without warmth. Miss Holloway. She didn't offer her hand. Didn't smile. Just settled into the chair across from my desk like she was granting me an audience. I've heard you're the best wedding planner in Manhattan. I like to think so. Good. 'Cause this wedding needs to be the event of the decade. 300 guests. Cavallo Estate on Long Island. 8 weeks from now. I nearly choked on my coffee. 8 weeks? For a 300-person wedding at a private estate. Is that a problem? It's ambitious. I pulled out my tablet, already calculating the logistics. Most weddings of that scale require 6 months minimum. Venues, catering, flowers, photography. Money is not a concern. She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. Whatever resources you need, you'll have. My fiancé's family is quite well connected. And who is your fiancé? Dominic Cavallo. The name meant nothing to me. But something in the way she said it, the slight pause, the careful pronunciation, suggested it should. I'll need to meet with both of you, I said. Discuss your vision, your preferences. My preferences are what matter. Dominic has no interest in the details. Her smile was thin. He's a practical man. He understands that this wedding is a business arrangement, not a romance. A business arrangement? Our families have been connected for generations. This marriage solidifies certain alliances. She stood, smoothing her designer dress. I'll send over the initial guest list and venue requirements. You'll meet with Dominic tomorrow at the estate to assess the space. Don't you want to be there? I have other commitments. She was already moving toward the door. Besides, the grounds are Dominic's domain. I'm sure he can answer whatever questions you have. She left without saying goodbye. I sat in my office, staring at the door, wondering what exactly I'd just agreed to. The Cavallo estate was not what I expected. I'd imagined something ostentatious. Gold fixtures and marble columns, the kind of gaudy wealth that screamed, "Look at me!" Instead, I found understated elegance. A sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion surrounded by gardens that had clearly been tended for generations. Old money whispered every stone and tree. The kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. A man met me at the gate, large, dark-haired, with the kind of watchful eyes that suggested he was more than a simple employee. Miss Holloway? I'm Marco. Mr. Cavallo is expecting you. He led me through the grounds, past rose gardens and fountains and a vineyard that stretched toward the horizon. The scale was overwhelming. This wasn't a home, it was a kingdom. The ceremony will be in the main garden, Marco explained as we walked. Reception in the ballroom. The bride has requested a tent on the south lawn for the cocktail hour. Has she seen the space? Miss Bellini prefers to delegate. There was something in his tone, not quite disapproval but close, that made me curious. And Mr. Cavallo? What are his preferences? Mr. Cavallo's preferences are his own business. Marco stopped at a set of French doors. He's in his study. Through here. I stepped inside, expecting a formal office, dark wood and leather, the typical trappings of masculine power. Instead, I found books, thousands of them. Floor-to-ceiling shelves covering every wall, crammed with volumes in multiple languages. The scent of old paper and leather filled the air. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light, was a man who made my breath catch. He turned as I entered, and I understood immediately why Francesca had called him practical. Dominic Cavallo wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too sharp, too intense, a jaw that could cut glass, cheekbones that belonged on ancient warriors, eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see straight through me, but there was something magnetic about him. Something that made it impossible to look away. Miss Holloway. His voice was deeper than I expected, with just a trace of an accent. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. I forced professionalism into my tone. Your estate is beautiful. It's been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather built it when he first came to America. He moved away from the window, and I noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. The careful way he held himself, like a predator at rest. Francesca tells me you're the best. I try to be. Try isn't good enough. This wedding needs to be perfect. His eyes held mine. Flawless in every detail. No mistakes. No surprises. May I ask why? 8 weeks is an extremely tight timeline. Most couples would. We're not most couples. He cut me off, but not unkindly. This marriage has been arranged for years. The timing is political. Political? My family and the Bellinis have certain business interests that benefit from alliance. The wedding is a formality, a public declaration of unity. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Romance has nothing to do with it. That's very honest. I find honesty saves time. He gestured toward a seating area. Shall we discuss the details? We spent the next 2 hours reviewing logistics. Dominic was thorough, methodical in a way that surprised me. He had opinions about the flowers, no lilies, his mother was allergic before she died, the music, live orchestra, not a DJ, the seating arrangements, certain families couldn't be placed near each other for reasons he didn't explain. He was also surprisingly easy to talk to. You're very involved for someone who doesn't care about romance, I observed. I don't care about romance. I care about execution. He leaned back in his chair. A wedding is a performance. The guests are watching. Every detail sends a message. What message do you want to send? Power. Stability. The continuation of a legacy. His eyes found mine. What message did your wedding send? Question caught me off guard. I'm not married. But you were engaged. I can tell. He tilted his head, studying me. You wear other people's happiness like armor. That usually means you've lost your own. That's very presumptuous. That's very accurate. He stood, moving to a cabinet where he poured 2 glasses of something amber. I apologize. I have a habit of reading people. It comes with my profession, which is import and export. Among other things, he handed me a glass. Drink. You look like you need it. I shouldn't have accepted. This was a client meeting, not a social call. But something about the way he looked at me, like he actually saw me, not just the wedding planner facade, made me take the glass. His name was Derek, I heard myself say. We were supposed to get married 3 years ago. He left me at the altar. At the altar, in front of 200 guests. He sent a text message. Said he'd realized he was making a mistake. I drained half the glass. I found out later he'd been having an affair with my maid of honor. And now you plan other people's weddings. Someone has to believe in happy endings. Even if they're not mine. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. My mother believed in happy endings. She married my father for love, real love, not politics. She thought she could change him, make him better. He stared into his glass. She died believing she'd failed. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. He looked up at me and something shifted in his expression. You're not what I expected, Miss Holloway. Neither are you. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, softening the hard edges, making him almost beautiful. I like you, he said. That's inconvenient. Why? Because I'm about to marry someone else. He set down his glass. And I'm beginning to think that might be a mistake. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. Mr. Cavallo, Dominic. If we're going to be confessing our tragic backstories, we should at least use first names. Dominic. I stood, setting my own glass aside. I should go. We can continue the planning tomorrow. Of course. He moved to open the door for me, but paused with his hand on the handle. Nadia, may I call you Nadia? Yes. I meant what I said. You're not what I expected. His eyes held mine. I have a feeling you're going to complicate my life considerably. Is that a complaint? It's an observation. He smiled. And possibly a confession. I left the Cavallo estate with my heart racing and my professional boundaries in tatters. This was a job. Just a job. 8 weeks, one wedding, and then I'd never see Dominic Cavallo again, but as I drove back to the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Vivian was waiting when I got back to the office. So, she bounced on her heels. How was it? Is the estate gorgeous? Is the groom terrifying? I heard rumors about the Cavallo family. What kind of rumors? The kind that involve concrete shoes and midnight boat rides. She lowered her voice dramatically. They say he's connected. Like, connected. You think my client is in the mafia? I think your client is definitely in the mafia. Cavallos have been New York royalty for decades. The legal kind and the other kind. She studied my face. Oh no. What happened? Nothing happened. Your cheeks are flushed. Your hands are shaking. Something definitely happened. I had a drink with the groom. We talked. He was not what I expected. Not what you expected. How? I thought about Dominic's storm gray eyes. His unexpected vulnerability. The way he looked at me like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. He's complicated, I said finally. And he's marrying the wrong woman. Nadia. Vivian's voice was warning. Please tell me you're not falling for a mafia boss who's engaged to someone else. I'm not falling for anyone. I'm planning his wedding. That's all. But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie because something had shifted in that study. Something I couldn't take back, and I had 8 weeks to figure out what to do about it. The next 3 weeks were a study in professional torture. Every day brought new meetings, new decisions, new opportunities to be in the same room as Dominic Cavallo while pretending I didn't feel the electricity between us. The florist needs final approval on the centerpieces, I said, spreading photographs across the dining room table. Francesca requested white roses and orchids, but I thought we might add some depth with whatever you think is best. Dominic didn't look at the photos. He was looking at me. You have excellent taste. You haven't seen my suggestions yet. I don't need to. I trust you. Those 3 words shouldn't have affected me. Clients trusted me all the time. That was literally my job. But the way Dominic said it, like he was offering something precious, made my chest tighten. The bride should really be involved in these decisions. The bride is in Milan for Fashion Week. His voice was flat. She left yesterday. She'll be back 3 days before the wedding. 3 days? That's not nearly enough time for final fittings, rehearsals. Francesca doesn't believe in rehearsals. She thinks they're pedestrian. Pedestrian. I couldn't hide my disbelief. She's getting married in front of 300 people and she thinks practice is pedestrian? Francesca believes she was born knowing how to be perfect. Dominic's smile was sardonic. Who am I to argue? You're her fiancé. You're supposed to argue about things like this. Am I? He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. Tell me, Nadia, in your experience, what do couples argue about before their weddings? Guest lists, budgets, family drama, whether to have a DJ or a band. I paused. Normal things. Things that matter because they care about the outcome. And what if they don't care? Then why get married at all? He turned to face me, and I saw something raw in his expression, something he'd been hiding beneath layers of control. 'Cause some choices aren't choices. They're obligations. His voice was quiet. My father arranged this marriage when I was 22. Francesca and I have been engaged for 12 years. Postponed 5 times for various reasons. Her career, my responsibilities, convenient delays we both welcomed. 12 years. The Bellini alliance is crucial to my family's interests. Breaking the engagement would mean war, literal war in some cases. He moved closer to me. I've spent my entire life preparing for this, accepting that duty matters more than desire. That sounds lonely. It is. His eyes held mine. Until recently. My heart stuttered. Dominic, I know. I shouldn't say these things. You're my wedding planner, not my confessor. He laughed without humor. But you're the only person I've met in years who looks at me like I'm a person instead of a position. You are a person. To you, maybe. To everyone else, I'm the Cavallo heir. The next dawn. A chess piece in a game that started before I was born. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. Do you know what I thought when I first saw you? What? That you were the most beautiful complication I'd ever encountered. I should have stepped back. Should have reminded both of us, that this was inappropriate. That he was engaged. That I had a job to do. Instead, I stood frozen, feeling the warmth of his touch, wanting things I had no right to want. We can't do this, I whispered. I know. You're getting married in 5 weeks. I know. Then why are you looking at me like that? Because I can't stop. His hand dropped to his side. Believe me, I've tried. The door opened behind us. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Mr. Cavallo. Marco appeared in the doorway. Your father is on the phone. He wants to discuss the security arrangements. Of course. Dominic's professional mask slid back into place. Nadia, we'll continue this tomorrow. Marco will show you out. He was gone before I could respond. You need to quit this job. Vivian was pacing my apartment, her wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. I'm serious. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Nothing has happened. Yet. Nothing has happened yet. She spun to face me. But something will. I can see it in your face every time you come back from that estate. You're falling for him. I'm not, don't lie to me. She sat beside me on the couch. I've known you for 5 years. I was there when Derek destroyed you. I watched you rebuild yourself piece by piece, convincing yourself that you could channel all that romantic energy into other people's happy endings. Her voice softened. And now you're falling for a man who literally cannot give you a happy ending. I know the situation is impossible. Then walk away. I can't. The admission cost me something. The contract is signed. The deposits are paid. If I quit now, my reputation is ruined. Your reputation isn't worth your heart. Maybe not. But it's worth my business. My livelihood. Everything I've built since Derek left me with nothing. I set down my wine. I'll be professional. I'll keep my distance. In 5 weeks, the wedding will be over and I'll never see Dominic Cavallo again. And if he says something, does something, what then? Then I'll handle it. Like you handled it today? When you came home looking like someone had set your soul on fire? I didn't have an answer for that because she was right. Every moment with Dominic was dangerous. Every conversation pulled me deeper into something I couldn't control. I'll be careful, I said finally. That's all I can promise. That's not enough. It's all I have. The venue walkthrough was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Francesca had returned from Milan early, a surprise that pleased no one, least of all Dominic, whose expression when she arrived was carefully blank. The garden looks adequate, Francesca said, surveying the ceremony space with a critical eye. Though I expected more drama. We could add additional floral arrangements, I suggested. Arches, perhaps, or suspended installations. No. Too theatrical. She turned to Dominic. What do you think, darling? The endearment sounded wrong in her mouth. Performative. Like a line from a script she'd memorized but didn't believe. Whatever makes you happy, Dominic said. You always say that. Just once, I'd like you to have an opinion. I have many opinions. I've simply learned that sharing them with you is pointless. The air crackled with tension. Perhaps we should move on to the reception space, I interjected. The ballroom has several configuration options, fine. Francesca was already walking away. Though I doubt anything will meet my standards. I followed, but Dominic caught my arm, holding me back for a moment. I apologize for that, he murmured. She's not usually this difficult. I was going to say present. His smile was wry. We've perfected the art of avoiding each other. Being in the same space requires adjustment. You're about to be married. You'll have to be in the same space fairly often. Will we? Something flickered in his eyes. Marriages in my world are about alliance, not companionship. After the wedding, Francesca will return to her life and I'll return to mine. We'll meet for public events and family obligations. Nothing more. That sounds practical. He released my arm. I told you. Romance has nothing to do with it. He walked away, and I stood in the garden, surrounded by roses that would witness a wedding neither party wanted, wondering how anyone could accept a life so empty of love. The confrontation happened a week later that I was in the estate's library, finalizing seating arrangements when Francesca appeared. She closed the door behind her with a decisive click. Miss Holloway. We need to talk. Of course. I set aside my tablet. Is there something about the arrangements? This isn't about the arrangements. She moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood. This is about you and my fiancé. My blood ran cold. I don't know what you mean. Don't insult my intelligence. She sat across from me, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. I've seen the way he looks at you. The way he finds excuses to be wherever you are. The way his voice changes when he says your name. Mrs. Bellini, miss. I'm not married yet. Her smile was sharp. Though that is the point, isn't it? I'm not married yet, and you're wondering if perhaps that means there's still time. I'm not wondering anything. I'm doing my job. Your job is to plan a wedding, and not to seduce the groom. I haven't seduced anyone. No? She leaned forward. Then why does Dominic light up whenever you enter a room? Why does he talk about you constantly? Nadia thinks this, Nadia suggested that, when he's barely acknowledged my existence in 12 years. I can't control how he feels. No. But you can control what you do about it. Her voice hardened. Let me be clear, Miss Holloway. This wedding will happen. The alliance will be secured. Whatever feelings you think exist between you and Dominic are irrelevant. I know that. Do you? 'Cause I've seen women like you before. Romantics who believe that love conquers all. Who think they can swoop in and save a man from a fate he's already accepted. She stood. Dominic will never leave me. His family, his duty, his entire world depends on this marriage. If you care about him at all, you'll finish this job and disappear. And if I refuse, then I'll make sure you never work in this city again. The Bellini name carries weight in circles you can't imagine. Her smile was ice. Don't test me. She left, and I sat alone in the library, her words echoing in my ears. She was right. I knew she was right. Whatever I felt for Dominic, whatever he felt for me, it couldn't matter. The walls around us were too high, the stakes too severe that I should have walked away then. Should have invented an emergency, recommended a colleague, extracted myself before the damage became irreparable. Instead, I stayed because despite everything, despite logic and self-preservation and the certainty that this would end in pain, I couldn't bear to leave him, not yet. The moment I'd been dreading came 3 days before the wedding. The final walkthrough was complete. The vendors were confirmed. Every detail had been polished to perfection. All that remained was the rehearsal dinner, the ceremony, and the rest of my life without Dominic Cavallo. That I was in the garden, making last-minute adjustments to the altar decorations, when I heard his footsteps behind me. Nadia. I turned. He stood in the fading light, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. More human. "The arbor looks perfect," he said. "Everything looks perfect. That's what you're paying me for. I'm paying you to plan a wedding. You've done so much more than that." He moved closer. "You've made me question everything I thought I knew about my life. Dominic, please don't. I have to say this. Before it's too late." He took my hands and I felt the tremor in his fingers. "These past weeks, being near you, talking to you, seeing the world through your eyes, it's been the happiest I've ever been. And the most painful. Because every moment with you reminds me of everything I'll never have. You're getting married in 3 days." "I know." His voice cracked. "I've told myself 1,000 times that it doesn't matter. That duty outweighs desire. That I can live the rest of my life in a loveless marriage because that's what's expected of me. Then why are we having this conversation? Because I can't stop thinking about a different future. One where I'm brave enough to choose what I want instead of what I'm supposed to want." His hands tightened on mine. "What if I want to marry you instead?" The words hit me like lightning. "What?" "You heard me." His eyes held mine with desperate intensity. "What if I cancel everything? Call off the wedding? Tell my father and the Bellinis and everyone else to go to hell?" "You can't do that." "Why not?" "Because you said it yourself, it would mean war. People would get hurt. Everything your family has built would be meaningless without you." He cupped my face in his hands. "I've spent 34 years living for everyone else. For once in my life, I want to live for myself. For us. There is no us. There can't be. There already is." He kissed me. It wasn't gentle or questioning. It was desperate, the kiss of a man who'd finally stopped fighting what he wanted. And God help me, I kissed him back, pouring every forbidden feeling into that single moment of connection. When we separated, we were both shaking. "Tell me to stop," he breathed. "Tell me this is wrong and I'll walk away." "It is wrong." "Then why aren't you walking away?" "Because I'm as lost as you are." Tears streamed down my face. "Because I fell in love with you somewhere between the seating charts and the flower arrangements, and I don't know how to unfeel it." "Then don't." He pulled me closer. "Don't unfeel it. Don't pretend it doesn't exist. Just give me a chance to figure this out." "Figure what out?" "Your wedding is in 3 days. Then give me 3 days." His eyes held mine. "Let me handle Francesca. Let me talk to my father. And let me find a way to make this work. And if you can't, then at least we'll know we tried." He kissed my forehead. "Please, Nadia. I know I'm asking for the impossible, but you're the only thing that's felt real in years. I'm not ready to give that up." I should have said no. Should have protected myself from the inevitable heartbreak, but love isn't logical. Love doesn't wait for permission. 3 days, I whispered. "But if you can't fix this, I will. I promise." He kissed me again, and I let myself believe just for a moment that impossible things could come true. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I threw myself into final preparations, confirming caterers, adjusting floral arrangements, coordinating with photographers, all while my heart hung suspended between hope and terror. Dominic had promised to handle things, to find a way out, but every hour that passed without word made the weight in my chest grow heavier. You look terrible, Vivian observed, finding me at the estate coordinating the rehearsal dinner setup. Have you slept at all? Define sleep. Conscious. Horizontal. Not obsessing over a man who's getting married in 36 hours. Then no. I haven't slept. Nadia. She pulled me aside, her voice low. What's going on? You've been different since last week. Did something happen? I wanted to tell her. Wanted to share the burden of hope and fear that had been crushing me for days. But saying the words out loud would make them real, would force me to confront the probability that this would end in devastation. Nothing happened. Liar. But she didn't push. Whatever it is, I'm here. You know that. I know. She returned to work, and I stood alone in the garden where Dominic had kissed me, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. The confrontation with Don Enzo came that evening that I was reviewing the rehearsal dinner timeline when Marco appeared. Miss Holloway. Don Enzo would like to speak with you. About what? He didn't say. Marco's expression was carefully neutral. This way, please. He led me to a study I hadn't seen before, darker than Dominic's library, lined with portraits of stern-faced men who shared his features. At the center, seated behind an ancient desk, was a man whose presence filled the room like a physical force. Don Enzo Cavallo was older than I expected, mid-70s, silver-haired, with eyes the same storm gray as his son's. But where Dominic's gaze held warmth beneath the surface, his father's was pure ice. Miss Holloway. He didn't stand. Didn't offer his hand. Please sit. I sat, trying to control the trembling in my hands. You've done excellent work with the wedding preparations. Everyone agrees. His voice was soft, almost pleasant, the voice of a man who didn't need to raise it to be obeyed. The Bellinis are impressed. The guests are anticipating a magnificent event. Thank you. Which makes your current behavior all the more disappointing. My blood turned to ice. I don't understand. I think you do. He leaned forward, his eyes pinning me in place. My son came to me this morning. Told me he wants to call off the wedding. That he's fallen in love with someone else. A pause. With you. Don Enzo, don't. The word was soft but absolute. Don't insult me with denials. I've spent 50 years reading people. I know exactly what's been happening between you and Dominic. Nothing has happened. Perhaps not physically, but emotionally, psychologically. His smile was cold. You've gotten inside his head, made him question decisions he made years ago, convinced him that love is more important than duty. I didn't convince him of anything. He reached those conclusions himself. Did he? Or did you simply appear at the right moment, beautiful, sympathetic, everything Francesca isn't, and offer him an escape from a life he was never brave enough to reject? The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I had appeared at a moment when Dominic was vulnerable. Had offered him something his arranged marriage never would, but that didn't mean his feelings weren't real. Your son is a grown man, I said carefully. He's capable of making his own decisions. My son is the heir to an empire built on alliances and obligations. His decisions affect thousands of people, employees, families, communities that depend on our operations. Don Enzo stood, moving to the window. The Bellini alliance isn't just about money or power. It's about stability. Without it, rival factions will move against us. People will die. That's not my responsibility. No. But it is Dominic's. And by distracting him from that responsibility, you've put everything at risk. He turned to face me. I'm going to make this very simple, Miss Holloway. You have two options. Options? Option 1. You complete your work, attend the wedding as a professional, and then disappear from my son's life forever. In exchange, you'll receive a generous bonus, enough to expand your business, buy a home, secure your future. And option 2. Option 2, you refuse. You continue this affair, encourage Dominic to destroy his family's legacy for a fantasy. His voice hardened. And I make sure you never work in this city, in this country, again. I make sure your friends, your family, anyone you've ever cared about understands exactly what kind of woman you are. You're threatening me. I'm protecting my family. There's a difference. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming. Dominic is my only son. I love him more than you can possibly understand. But love sometimes means making hard choices for people who can't make them themselves. He's not a child. No. But he's been sheltered from certain realities. He doesn't understand what war looks like, what happens when alliances collapse and enemies smell weakness. Don Enzo says held mine. I've kept him safe his entire life. I won't let a wedding planner destroy that because she has a pretty face and romantic notions. I should have been terrified. Should have capitulated immediately, taken the money and fled. Instead, I felt something unexpected, anger. You don't know me, I said, standing. You don't know anything about me except that I'm inconvenient to your plans. You assume I'm after money or status or some fantasy of becoming a mafia princess. Aren't you? No. I'm a woman who fell in love with a man despite knowing it was impossible. I didn't plan this. Didn't scheme for it. It just happened. My voice strengthened. And whatever you threaten, whatever you offer, you can't make me regret it. Can't I? No. Because even if I walk away, even if Dominic marries Francesca and I never see him again, I'll know that for a few weeks I was loved by someone extraordinary. That's worth more than your money. Don Enzo studied me for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost wondering. You actually love him? Yes. And you'd sacrifice your future for that love? If I have to. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, but recalculation. You're not what I expected, Miss Holloway. I get that a lot. My son said the same thing. He returned to his desk, sitting heavily. Leave. I need to think. About what? About whether I've been wrong about several things. He waved his hand dismissively. Go. The rehearsal dinner starts in 3 hours. I left his study with my heart pounding and my future more uncertain than ever. Dominic found me in the rose garden an hour later. I heard about my father. His face was tight with anger. I'm sorry. I had no idea It's fine. It's not fine. He had no right to threaten you. He's protecting his family. I understand that. I turned to face him. What I don't understand is what happens now. The rehearsal dinner is in 2 hours. The wedding is tomorrow. And we're standing in a garden pretending any of this is normal. I'm working on it. Working on what? Your father made his position clear. So did Francesca. Everyone wants this wedding to happen except us. Not everyone. He took my hands. I've been making calls, reaching out to allies who might support a different path. There are people who've questioned the Bellini alliance for years, people who might welcome change. And if there aren't enough of them, then we disappear together. Start over somewhere no one knows the Cavallo name. You'd give up everything? Your family, your position, your entire life. For you? Yes. His eyes held mine with fierce certainty. I've spent 34 years doing what was expected, being who everyone needed me to be. For once, I want to choose. What if it's the wrong choice? Then at least it's mine. He pulled me closer. I love you, Nadia. I didn't plan to, didn't expect to, but I do. And I'm not willing to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Dominic, the rehearsal dinner is tonight. I'm going to speak to Francesca afterward. Tell her the truth. His jaw tightened. Whatever happens next, I want to face it honestly. She'll be furious. She'll be relieved. His voice softened. We've both been pretending for years. This wedding isn't what either of us wants. It's time to admit that. And if she won't admit it, if she insists on going through with it, then I'll call it off anyway. Publicly if necessary. He kissed my forehead. I know I'm asking you to take a leap of faith. To trust that I can make this work when everything suggests I can't. I trust you. Even after everything my father said, especially after that. I smiled slightly. He threatened to destroy my career and my life. I'm still here. That should tell you something. It tells me I'm the luckiest man alive. Kissed me softly. Tonight, after the dinner, everything changes. Promise. Promise. He left to prepare for the dinner, and I stood alone in the garden, suspended between hope and terror tonight. Everything would change tonight, but I just didn't know if the change would save us or destroy us. The rehearsal dinner was a masterpiece of tension. 300 guests, a preview of tomorrow's crowd, mingled in the estate's ballroom, sipping champagne and admiring the decor. Francesca glided through the room like a queen, accepting compliments with practiced grace. Don Enzo watched from the head table, his expression unreadable, and Dominic kept finding excuses to be near me. The centerpieces are perfect, he murmured, brushing past me near the bar. The seating arrangement is flawless, he said, catching my eye across the room. Every interaction was brief, professional to anyone watching, but charged with meaning only we understood. You're playing with fire, Vivian hissed during a rare moment alone. Everyone can see you two making eyes at each other. We're being careful. You're being obvious. She grabbed my arm. What's going on? What aren't you telling me? After tonight. I'll explain everything after tonight. Nadia, please. Just trust me. She released me reluctantly, and I returned to my duties, counting the minutes until the dinner ended and Dominic could speak to Francesca, but fate had other plans. The commotion started near the entrance. I heard raised voices first, Italian, rapid and angry. Then movement as security converged on a group of men who'd pushed past the doorway. What's happening? I asked Marco, who'd appeared beside me. Bellini soldiers. Francesca's family. His voice was grim. They've heard rumors about Dominic's intentions. They're here to make sure the wedding happens. They can't force him. In our world, they can do many things. Marco's hand found my arm. You need to leave. Now. Before this becomes something you can't unsee. I'm not leaving. Miss Holloway, Nadia. Dominic's voice cut through the chaos. He was pushing through the crowd toward me, his face pale. We need to talk. Now. But before he could reach me, Francesca stepped into his path. Going somewhere, darling? Her voice was ice. I thought we might address our guests together. Clear up some unfortunate misunderstandings. There's nothing to clear up. No? Then why did my mother receive a call this evening suggesting you plan to humiliate our family by canceling the wedding? The room fell silent. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward them. Francesca. Not here. Where then? In private, so you can lie to my face again? Her composure cracked, revealing fury beneath. I've tolerated your distance. Your disinterest. Your transparent infatuation with the help. Her eyes found mine. But I will not tolerate public humiliation. Then let's end this quietly. Both of us. Admit that neither of us wants this marriage. What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what our families need. Her voice hardened. You will marry me tomorrow, Dominic. Or there will be consequences. Is that a threat? It's a promise. She smiled coldly. Ask your wedding planner what my mother's people are capable of. She seems to have attracted their attention. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dominic turned to look at me, and I saw the moment he understood. This wasn't just about alliances anymore. It was about survival. The hours after the rehearsal dinner were chaos. Dominic pulled me into his study while Marco held off the Bellini soldiers. His hands were shaking. I'd never seen him afraid before, and the sight made everything real in a way it hadn't been. "You need to leave," he said. "Tonight. Before the Bellinis can." "I'm not leaving you." "Nadia, you don't understand what they're capable of. The Bellinis don't make empty threats. If they've decided you're an obstacle, then I'll deal with it." I gripped his arms. I didn't come this far to run away the moment things got difficult. This isn't difficult. This is dangerous. His voice cracked. I can't protect you if you're not safe. I can't think clearly if I'm worried about what they might do to you. And I can't think clearly knowing you're here alone, facing this without me. I met his eyes. We're in this together. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Before he could argue, the door burst open. Don Enzo stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Behind him, I could see Marco and several other men, Cavallo soldiers, I realized, positioned against the Bellini presence. "Everyone out," Don Enzo commanded. "Except my son and Miss Holloway." The room emptied. The door closed. And I found myself facing the man who'd threatened to destroy my life just hours ago. "Father," Dominic started. "Be quiet." Don Enzo moved to his desk, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey with hands that were surprisingly steady. "Drink. Both of you. We have things to discuss. If this is about the wedding, this is about everything." He handed us each a glass, keeping one for himself. "Sit." We Saturday. Don Enzo remained standing, his gaze moving between us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "I had a conversation with Alessandra Bellini this evening. Francesca's mother." His voice was flat. "She informed me that if Dominic cancels the wedding, the Bellinis will consider it an act of war. They will move against our operations. People will die." "Father, I can't," I said. "Be quiet." Don Enzo's eyes flashed. "She also informed me of something else. Something I should have discovered years ago if I hadn't been so focused on the alliance." "What?" "Francesca has been conducting an affair. For the past 3 years. With a man named Alessandro Romano, the son of one of our chief rivals." The silence was deafening. "You're certain?" Dominic's voice was barely a whisper. Alessandra confirmed it herself. "Apparently, Francesca has been using the wedding delays to continue the relationship, always assuming she could end it before the actual ceremony." Don Enzo's laugh was bitter. "It seems my son isn't the only one who's been questioning this arrangement. Then why is she insisting on going through with it?" "'Cause Alessandra is insisting. The alliance with our family is more valuable than her daughter's happiness, or her hypocrisy." Don Enzo drained his whiskey. "The Bellinis want our power. They don't care about love or loyalty or anything except what we can give them. So what do we do?" Don Enzo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, older somehow. More tired. "When I was your age, I married for love. Your mother was everything to me. She made me want to be better than what this life demanded." His eyes found mine. "She died believing I'd become the monster I fought so hard not to be. Father, I've spent 30 years trying to protect you from my mistakes. Arranged the Bellini marriage because I thought alliances were safer than feelings. Convinced myself that duty was more important than happiness." He laughed softly. "And now I find that I've been protecting you from the wrong things." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I was wrong." The admission seemed to cost him something. "About the marriage. About Miss Holloway. About what really matters in this life." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "Don Enzo, you love my son." It wasn't a question. Despite my threats. Despite the danger. Despite everything telling you to run. "Yes." "And you, Dominic? You love her? The more than anything." Don Enzo nodded slowly. Then we find a way out of this. Together. How? The Bellinis will retaliate. The Bellinis are weaker than they appear. Their alliance with the Romanos is unstable. Their daughter has been unfaithful. Their leverage depends on us being afraid of conflict. Don Enzo's smile was cold. I've been avoiding conflict for too long. Perhaps it's time to remind people who they're dealing with. You'd go to war for me? I'd burn the world for you. Don Enzo's voice was fierce. You're my son, my only child. If this woman makes you happy, if she's worth fighting for, then we fight. And Francesca will be given a choice. End the engagement quietly, preserving what dignity she can, or have her affair exposed to everyone. I suspect she'll choose the former. I sat in stunned silence, watching the most powerful man I'd ever met demolish the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable just hours ago. Why? I heard myself ask. Why are you doing this now? What changed? Don Enzo looked at me, and for the first time I saw something human beneath the ice. You stood in my study and told me that love was worth more than money. Worth more than your career or your safety or your future. His voice softened. I've heard those words before. 40 years ago. From a woman who believed them enough to marry a monster. Your wife. My everything. He turned away. I failed her. Let the world harden me into something she wouldn't recognize. I won't let my son make the same mistake. Dominic stood, crossing to his father. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two men from different generations, different worlds, finally understanding each other. Then Don Enzo pulled his son into an embrace. Be happy, he said roughly. That's an order. Yes, sir. Confrontation with Francesca happened at midnight. Don Enzo had summoned her to the study, along with her mother Alessandra. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Two families on the brink of war gathered to negotiate peace. You can't do this, Alessandra hissed. The alliance has been agreed for 12 years. The guests are already here. The alliance was based on false premises. Don Enzo's voice was ice. Your daughter has been unfaithful. Your family has been using this engagement to position yourselves for a power grab. The wedding is cancelled. This is outrageous. This is reality. Don Enzo produced a folder, sliding it across the desk. Photographs, financial records, communication transcripts. Everything we need to expose Francesca's affair to every family that matters. Alessandra's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Don Enzo's smile was dangerous. Or we can end this quietly. The engagement is dissolved due to irreconcilable differences. Both families save face. No one gets hurt. And if we refuse, then war. And I promise you, Alessandra, the Bellinis will not survive what comes next. The silence stretched for an eternity, then Francesca laughed. Everyone turned to look at her. She sat in her chair, perfectly composed, watching the proceedings with an expression I couldn't read. You all think you're so clever, she said. Maneuvering and threatening and playing your little games. But none of you understand what I actually want. What do you want? Dominic asked. Freedom. The word came out like a prayer. Do you know what it's like, being promised to someone since you were 16? Being told your only value is the alliance you can secure? Being treated like property, passed between families for their benefit? Francesca, I never wanted to marry you, Dominic. I never wanted any of this. Her eyes glistened. Alessandro is the only thing that's ever been mine. The only choice I've ever made for myself. Then why insist on the wedding? Why threaten to destroy everything? 'Cause my mother gave me no choice. 'Cause she said the alliance was more important than my happiness. Because I've spent my entire life doing what was expected and I didn't know how to stop. She turned to Alessandra. But I'm stopping now. Francesca, you cannot. I can. And I will. Francesca stood, her composure cracking to reveal something raw underneath. This engagement is over. The alliance is over. I'm going to marry Alessandro Romano, and if you try to stop me, I'll tell everyone exactly how you've controlled and manipulated me for 20 years. Alessandra looked like she'd been slapped. You ungrateful, I'm done being grateful. I'm done being obedient. I'm done. Francesca turned to Don Enzo. You want me to disappear quietly? Fine. But I want guarantees. Protection for Alessandro. Safety for both of us. Done. Then we have nothing more to discuss. She moved toward the door, pausing beside me. You're braver than I was. Don't let them take that from you. She was gone before I could respond. The fallout was swift but manageable. By morning, the wedding had been officially canceled. Guests were informed that the engagement had been mutually dissolved. The Bellinis retreated to lick their wounds and plot their next move. And Dominic and I stood in the garden where our story had really begun, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. It's over, he said softly. I can't believe it's actually over. Are you okay? I'm better than okay. I'm free. He turned to face me. For the first time in my life, I get to choose what happens next. And what do you want to happen next? I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to build something real, not alliances or obligations, but a life. A family. Everything I was told I couldn't have. That's a lot to want. I've been waiting 34 years. I have a lot of wanting to catch up on. He took my hands. Stay with me, Nadia. Not as my wedding planner. Not as a temporary solution. As my partner. My equal. My everything. Dominic, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 8 weeks. But I've learned more about love in 8 weeks with you than I did in 12 years of engagement to Francesca. His eyes held mine. Say yes. Please. I looked at him, this impossible man who'd turned my world upside down. Who'd fought against his family, his obligations, his entire life to be with me. Yes, I whispered. His smile was brighter than the sunrise. Yes. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll build something with you. Yes to all of it. I laughed through tears. Though I should warn you, I've never actually planned my own happy ending. I might be terrible at it. Then we'll figure it out together. Kissed me softly. That's what partners do. We stood in that garden, surrounded by decorations for a wedding that would never happen, creating our own beginning instead, and for the first time in 3 years, I believed that happy endings were possible, even for me. 3 months of peace. That's what we had before the Bellinis made their move. 3 months of learning each other, the small things, the everyday things. Dominic liked his coffee black and his pasta al dente. He read poetry before bed and watched terrible action movies to unwind. He had a habit of touching my hair when he was thinking and a smile that still made my heart stutter every time I saw it. And I learned that love, real love, was nothing like what I'd experienced before. Derek had wanted a version of me, polished, agreeable, always ready to accommodate his needs. Dominic wanted me. The real me. The messy, complicated, sometimes difficult version that I'd spent years hiding. You're thinking too loud, he said one morning, finding me on the terrace overlooking the gardens. I'm thinking about how different this is. From everything I expected. Good different or bad different? Good. Terrifyingly good. I turned to face him. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For something to prove that this is too perfect to last. Nothing is perfect. He pulled me into his arms. But this is real. And real is better than perfect. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise. You're just now noticing. His grin was boyish. Also, my father gave me a lecture about not screwing this up. He's surprisingly invested in your happiness. Don Enzo? He asks about you every time we talk. Wants to know if you're eating enough, sleeping enough, working too hard. Dominic laughed. I think you've replaced me as his favorite. That's terrifying in a completely different way. Welcome to the family. The words hung between us, light, almost casual, but loaded with meaning. Family, I repeated. Too soon. No. I smiled. It sounds right. He kissed me, and for a moment everything was perfect. Then Marco appeared with news that shattered the peace. The Bellinis had been making moves. Marco's face was grim as he spread documents across Dominic's desk. Quiet moves. Building alliances with families who have grievances against us. Which families? The Romanos, surprisingly. Despite Francesca's relationship with Alessandro. Also the Martinellis and the Corsettis. Marco paused. They're planning something, Dom. Something big. Do we know what? Not yet. But our sources suggest it involves Miss Holloway. My blood ran cold. Me? Why? Because you're the reason their alliance collapsed. In their eyes, you're the catalyst for everything that went wrong. Marco's expression was apologetic. They want revenge. And you're the easiest target. She's not a target, Dominic said, his voice deadly. She's under my protection. They know that. Which is why they're being careful. Building support. Waiting for the right moment. Marco gathered the documents. I'll keep digging. But you should be prepared. He left, and the silence that followed was suffocating. I should leave, I said quietly. Dominic spun to face me. What? If I'm the reason they're coming after you, after your family, no! The word was absolute. Don't even think about it. Dominic, be practical. If my presence is putting everyone at risk, then we eliminate the risk. We don't eliminate you. He crossed to me, gripping my arms. I didn't fight my father, the Bellinis, and every expectation I've ever had just to lose you because some vindictive family can't accept defeat. It's not about losing me. It's about protecting you. I don't need protection. I need you. His voice cracked. 3 months ago, I was prepared to marry someone I didn't love because I didn't think I deserved anything better. You showed me I was wrong. You made me believe that happiness was possible. I'm not giving that up, even if it means war. I'd fight 1,000 wars for you. His forehead touched mine. We've faced this together. That was the deal. I didn't agree to put your entire family at risk. My family can handle themselves. They've been handling threats for generations. He pulled back to look at me. What they can't handle is me becoming the cold, distant man I was before you. That's what happens if you leave. That's what the Bellinis would really be taking from me. I wanted to argue, wanted to protect him from himself. But the fierce certainty in his eyes broke through every defense. Together, I whispered. Together. The attack came 2 weeks later. Not the physical kind, the Bellinis were too smart for that. Instead, they struck where it would hurt most. My business. Started with canceled contracts. Clients who'd been enthusiastic suddenly went cold, citing scheduling conflicts or changing circumstances. Then came the whispers, rumors about my involvement with organized crime, suggestions that Perfect Day events was just a front for money laundering. Within a month, I'd lost half my clients and all my credibility. This is my fault, Dominic said, pacing his study while I sat numbly on the couch. I should have anticipated. How could you? They went after the one thing you couldn't protect with guards or walls. I stared at my hands. My reputation. My career. Everything I built after Derek left me. We can rebuild. I'll invest. We'll create new connections. With what? The Cavallo name attached to everything I do? I laughed bitterly. That's exactly what they want. To prove that I'm just a mafia girlfriend trading on her boyfriend's power. You're not. I know what I am. I know what we are. I stood, moving to the window. But perception matters, especially in my industry. If people think I'm compromised, they won't trust me with their most important day. Then we fight back, expose what the Bellinis have done, and escalate this into something worse? I shook my head. That's exactly what they want. They're hoping you'll retaliate so they can justify their own attacks. So what? We do nothing. I don't know. The admission was painful. I've never been good at backing down, but I've also never had so much to lose. Dominic crossed to me, turning me to face him. Listen to me. Your business is not gone. Your reputation is not destroyed. This is a setback, a painful, infuriating setback, but it's not the end. How can you be sure? Because I know you. You're the woman who stood up to my father when he threatened to ruin you, who faced down the Bellinis at their own rehearsal dinner, who fell in love with a man everyone told her to avoid. His hands cupped my face. You don't give up. It's not in your nature. I'm tired, Dominic. Tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like everything I build gets torn down. Then let me fight for a while. Let me carry the weight until you're ready to pick it up again. That's not how partnership works. It's exactly how partnership works. We take turns. We support each other. We don't keep score. He kissed my forehead. You saved me from a life I didn't want. Let me save you from this. I wanted to refuse. Wanted to prove I could handle things myself. But sometimes strength means accepting help. Okay, I whispered. What do? We go to the source. His smile was dangerous. It's time the Bellinis learned what happens when they target someone I love. The meeting with Alessandra Bellini happened 3 days later. Neutral territory, a private room at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Don Enzo attended as well, his presence a reminder that Dominic didn't stand alone. Alessandra swept in like a queen, her expression cold and satisfied. Dominic. Enzo. Her eyes flicked to me dismissively. And the wedding planner. How charming. Alessandra. Dominic's voice was controlled. I think we both know why we're here. I'm sure I don't. I've been quite busy rebuilding the alliances your little romantic adventure destroyed. You've been systematically attacking my partner's livelihood. That ends today. Attacking? I've done nothing illegal. Simply shared some concerns with mutual acquaintances about the company she keeps. Alessandra's smile was venom. Is it my fault people draw their own conclusions? It's your fault you started a war you can't win. Can't I? She leaned forward. You humiliated my daughter. Destroyed an alliance that was generations in the making. Did you think there would be no consequences? Francesca made her own choices. She's happy now with Alessandro, building a life she actually wants. Perhaps you should try being glad for her instead of seeking revenge. Francesca is a disappointment. But that's beside the point. Alessandra's eyes hardened. The point is that you cost me power, prestige, everything I worked for. I intend to take it back. By destroying Nadia's business? She has nothing to do with our family politics. She has everything to do with it. She's the reason my plans failed. The reason my daughter abandoned her duty. Alessandra's voice dripped with contempt. A nobody wedding planner who seduced her way into your bed and destroyed everything. That's enough. Don Enzo's voice cut through like a blade. Everyone turned to look at him. Enzo, this doesn't concern. It concerns my family, my son, and the woman he loves. Don Enzo stood, his presence filling the room. You've had your petty revenge, Alessandra. You've damaged her reputation. made her suffer. But it ends here, does it? And what will you do if I refuse? I'll expose every secret the Bellini family has spent decades hiding. The bribes, the betrayals, the bodies. His smile was cold. Did you think I didn't know? That I stayed in this alliance out of ignorance? I stayed because it was convenient. But convenience has limits. Alessandra's face paled. You wouldn't. Try me. Don Enzo leaned closer. Call off your campaign against Miss Holloway. Restore her reputation. Make it clear to everyone that she is under Cavallo protection and attacking her means attacking us. And if I refuse, then I release everything. Tonight. To every family, every newspaper, every federal agency that might be interested. His eyes were ice. Your choice, Alessandra. Peace or destruction. Pick one. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Alessandra laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You've won, Enzo. For now. She stood. But remember, alliances shift. Power changes hands. What you've built can be torn down just as easily. Perhaps. But not today. Don Enzo's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Go home, Alessandra. Mourn the future you wanted. And move on. That's what the rest of us have done. She left without another word. In the silence that followed, I realized I was shaking. It's over, Dominic said, pulling me close. It's really over. For now, I echoed Alessandra's words. For now is enough. Kissed my temple. We'll handle tomorrow when it comes. And somehow I believed him. The rebuilding started slowly. After Alessandra's retreat, the whispers began to change. People who'd canceled suddenly wanted to reconnect. Industry contacts who'd gone silent started reaching out with apologies and explanations. They're scared, Vivian observed, watching me sort through a stack of inquiries. The Bellinis made them choose sides, and now they're realizing they chose wrong. They chose survival. I can't blame them for that. You can't? Can. I have a list. She waved a notebook. Everyone who dropped you the moment things got hard. I'm keeping track for future reference. Vivian. What? Holding grudges is one of my few talents. But her expression softened. Seriously though, how are you feeling? This is a lot. I looked around my office, the same space that had felt like a graveyard just weeks ago. Now it was coming back to life. New inquiries. New possibilities. A future I'd almost lost. I'm feeling grateful, I said honestly. And terrified. And ready to start again. Good. 'Cause you have a consultation in 20 minutes. Very exclusive client. Very particular about privacy. Who is it? He wouldn't say. Just that it was urgent and he needed the best. Vivian grinned. I told him you were available. Without knowing who he is. Some chances are worth taking. She stood, heading for the door. I'll send him in when he arrives. I spent the next 15 minutes organizing my desk and trying not to overthink. A mystery client wasn't unusual. Wealthy people often valued discretion. But something about Vivian's smile made me suspicious. When the door opened, I understood why Dominic stood in the doorway, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. Dark blue, perfectly tailored, with a burgundy tie that matched the flowers he carried. I have an appointment, he said, his expression carefully serious. Something about planning a wedding. Dominic, what? Please. Let me finish. He crossed to my desk, setting the flowers aside before taking both my hands. I've been thinking about this for weeks. Trying to find the perfect moment, the perfect words. But there is no perfect. There's just us. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear him. 6 months ago, you walked into my life to plan a wedding I didn't want. You saw through every wall I'd built. You made me believe that love was possible, real love, not the political arrangement I'd accepted as my fate. Dominic, I told you once that I wanted to marry you instead. That hasn't changed. If anything, it's grown stronger every day we've been together. He reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. I'm not asking you to plan someone else's wedding anymore. I'm asking you to plan ours. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not the ostentatious diamond I might have expected, but something simpler. An antique setting with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Elegant. Timeless. Perfect. This was my mother's, he said quietly. My father gave it to her on their wedding day. She wore it every day until she died. And now I want you to have it. Dominic, I don't know what to say. Say yes. His voice cracked. Say you'll marry me. Say you'll let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you stayed. I looked at him, this man who'd fought his family, his obligations, his entire world to be with me. Who'd held me through nightmares about Derek. Who'd made me believe in happy endings again. Yes. The word came out as a whisper. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face. Yes, I'll plan our wedding. Yes to everything. He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit like it had been waiting for me. Then he kissed me, and the rest of the world disappeared. Planning my own wedding was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done. This is ironic, Vivian observed, watching me stress over color palettes. You've planned hundreds of weddings. You literally do this for a living. That's different. Those were other people's dreams. This is mine. And that's a problem. It's pressure. What if I get it wrong? What if I look back in 20 years and regret the flowers or the venue or Nadia? Vivian grabbed my shoulders. Stop. Breathe. Remember why you're doing this. Because I love Dominic. Exactly. Not because of the flowers or the venue or any of the details you're obsessing over. Because you love him and he loves you. She smiled. The rest is just decoration. She was right. Of course she was right, but old habits died hard. I'd spent years channeling my romantic energy into other people's celebrations because I'd given up on having my own. And now that I had the chance, I wanted everything to be perfect. "'Kay," I said, taking a deep breath. "You're right. Doesn't matter if the napkins match the table runners. What matters is that you're marrying the love of your life. In front of people who care about you. And then living happily ever after." Vivian patted my cheek. "Now stop panicking and let me help you find a dress." The dress was the hardest part, not because I couldn't find one. There were thousands of options, each more beautiful than the last. But because every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman who'd been left at the altar 3 years ago. The woman who'd sworn off white dresses and romantic dreams. "You're doing it again," Vivian said, watching me stare at my reflection in yet another gown. "Doing what?" "Letting the past ruin the present." She moved to stand beside me. "Derek was a coward who didn't deserve you. That has nothing to do with this dress or this wedding or the man waiting to marry you. I know. Logically, I know that. Then stop being logical and start being happy." She turned me to face the mirror fully. "Look at yourself, Nadia. Really look. You're beautiful. You're loved. You're about to marry someone who would burn the world for you." I looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman Derek had left. I saw someone else, someone stronger. Someone who'd survived heartbreak and come out the other side. Someone who deserved every bit of happiness she was about to receive. "This is the one," I said quietly. "It's about time." Vivian grinned. "Now let's accessorize." The wedding was held at the Cavallo estate, not in the garden where Dominic and Francesca's ceremony would have taken place. That felt wrong somehow. Instead, we chose the terrace overlooking the vineyard, where the sunset would paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The guest list was small, family and close friends only. Don Enzo sat in the front row, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. Vivian stood beside me as maid of honor, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she'd sworn she wouldn't need. Marco served as best man, his usual stoicism cracking into something like a smile, and at the end of the aisle, waiting with barely contained emotion, was Dominic. He wore a charcoal suit with a burgundy tie, the same combination from the day he'd proposed. His eyes found mine the moment I appeared, and everything else faded away. "You look incredible," he murmured as I reached him. "You don't look so bad yourself. I've been practicing my vows for weeks. Now I can't remember a single word." "Then speak from the heart. That's what matters." The ceremony was simple. We'd written our own vows, words that spoke of unexpected beginnings and impossible odds and the kind of love neither of us had believed possible. "I spent my whole life thinking I knew what duty meant," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion. "That sacrifice was noble. That wanting things for myself was selfish. Then you came along and showed me that the greatest duty is to love fully, to choose happiness, to build something real instead of settling for something expected." "I spent my whole life planning happy endings for other people," I responded, tears streaming down my face, convincing myself that was enough, that I could live vicariously through their joy. Then you came along and refused to let me hide. You made me believe I deserved my own happy ending. And here I am, living it." When the officiant pronounced us married, Dominic kissed me like the world was ending and beginning all at once, and somewhere in the crowd I heard Don Enzo actually cheer. The reception was everything I'd dreamed and nothing I'd planned, not because things went wrong, they went right. Perfectly, beautifully right. But I barely noticed the details I'd obsessed over for months. The flowers could have been weeds for all I cared. The food could have been cardboard. All I saw was Dominic dancing with me under strings of lights, laughing at Vivian's toast, which was equal parts touching and inappropriate, holding my hand like he was afraid I might disappear. "You're thinking too loud," he said during a rare quiet moment. "I'm thinking about how strange life is. A year ago, I was delivering sushi and wondering if happiness was just something that happened to other people. A year ago, I was preparing to marry someone I didn't love because I thought that was my only option." He pulled me closer. "Funny how wrong we both were." "Funny isn't the word I'd use." "What word would you use?" "Miraculous." I smiled. "Improbable." "Absolutely, completely, terrifyingly wonderful." "Terrifyingly? The good things always scare me. I keep waiting for them to be taken away." "Then stop waiting." He cupped my face in his hands. "I'm not going anywhere." "Neither are you. This is real, Nadia. This is forever. Promise." "I already did. About 3 hours ago. In front of witnesses." His grin was boyish. "Weren't you paying attention?" "I was distracted by the handsome man at the altar. He sounds like a lucky guy. The luckiest." Kissed him softly. "And so am I." The encounter with Derek happened 6 months later. I was at a venue consultation, a new client, a spring wedding, when I saw him across the room. The man who'd shattered me. Who'd left me standing at an altar with 200 witnesses to my humiliation. He looked smaller than I remembered. Ordinary. The kind of man you'd pass on the street without noticing. Had I really spent 3 years letting him define my worth? "Nadia." He approached with the hesitant smile of someone testing uncertain ground. "I heard you got married." "To Dominic Cavallo, of all people." "I did." "That's unexpected." "Given everything." "Given what?" "My sworn-off attitude toward romance? My conviction that happy endings were fairy tales?" I smiled. "People change, Derek. Some of us grow. Some of us don't." His face tightened. I wanted to explain. About what happened between us. I was young. Confused. "I didn't mean to, it doesn't matter." "What?" "Whatever you meant or didn't mean." Whatever explanations you've crafted over the years. I met his eyes without flinching. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm not the woman you left at that altar. I'm someone better. Someone stronger. Someone who found love despite everything you did to convince me I couldn't. Nadia, goodbye, Derek. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I walked away without looking back, and I never thought about him again. 2 years later, I stood in my new office, twice the size of the original, with a view of Central Park, reviewing plans for the summer season. Perfect Day Events had become one of the most sought-after wedding planning firms in the city. We had a waiting list that stretched 18 months and a reputation that made Bellini whispers seem like ancient history. "There's someone here to see you," Vivian said, poking her head through the door. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. This is more important," she grinned. "Trust me." I followed her to the reception area, where Dominic waited with a bouquet of flowers and a smile that still made my heart stutter. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I thought you had meetings all day." "I rescheduled." He handed me the flowers. "I have news." "Good news or bad news?" "The best news." He pulled me into his arms. "We're pregnant." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "What? How do you know before you left the test in the bathroom?" I wasn't snooping. It was just there. His eyes were bright with tears. "We're having a baby, Nadia. A family. Everything I never thought I'd have." I started crying. Laughing. Both at once. "A baby," I repeated. "We're having a baby. We're having a baby." He kissed me, lifting me off my feet. "I love you." Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last hour. An oversight. I'll do better. He set me down, his hands cradling my still flat stomach. "I love you both." More than I knew was possible. I looked at this man, my husband, my partner, the father of my child. The impossible thing that had crashed into my life and refused to leave. "You know what this means," I said. "What?" "I'm going to have to plan the best baby shower in history. Professional reputation at stake." He laughed, and the sound filled every corner of my heart. I wouldn't expect anything less. We stood there, in the office I'd built from the ashes of heartbreak, holding a future neither of us had dared to dream, and I finally understood what happy endings really were. Not perfect moments. Not fairy tale finishes, just two people choosing each other every day no matter what. That was enough, that was everything. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed She Was Hired to Plan His Wedding to Another Woman, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories. Your comments mean the world to me. Let me know what you thought and what kind of stories you'd like to see next. Until next time, keep reading and stay mysterious.